There you go. Beautiful, abrupt ending of our intro. Welcome, everybody. We're here at Open Mic UK. I'm Suzi von Menzenkamp, and I'm based in Ireland. And my co-host this evening is Cathy Pratt, who's in Vermont in the US. And we have a very special guest who we're going to hang out and chat with for the next hour. Based in the UK, his name is David Harker. Thank you very much for joining us today, David.
Thanks, pleasure.
David's a professional remote viewer, and he's a mystic and a magician. So, buckle up is what I would say. He's also the host of one of my favorite podcasts that's out at the moment called The Psychic Guys. So I know you have lots to share, so I'm not going to elaborate too much, but welcome, David, and tell us how it feels to be a magician.
Well, it's at once very normal and really weird as well, isn't it? I mean, I got into all of this weird stuff through remote viewing because I used to be like the materialist, reductionist, scientist kind of engineering science type. And then I had like a spontaneous spiritual awakening kind of event in 2018. Nothing really changed. There wasn't like trumpets from heaven or anything, but I had this knowing that like I can't ignore this. I have to go on a search and find out what this is all about. And so I had spent a couple of months going down every like weird rabbit hole on the internet, researching all the weird things that I'd written off and ignored, because I knew like I must have ignored and written off something that was true, but I didn't know what it was, and I had no discernment or way of telling. So it was just like I just have to look at everything. And YouTube kept recommending this video that was like Russell Targ's banned TED Talk.
Oh, yeah.
I subsequently discovered it wasn't really banned. They just stopped him from headlining the conferences. Obviously still a TED Talk, where he talks about the remote viewing program. And I was like, really? That can't be true. No way. But I'd promised myself that I was going to be empirical, because I was like, I obviously can't trust anything that I know. So I've got to find an experiment that I can run at home without spending $600 on a seminar or buying a special helmet or whatever. There's got to be a way that I can use the scientific method to test for bullshit. So I was like, well, this is testable, even though it sounds nuts. This is the first thing where I can just do this experiment myself. So I just Googled like remote viewing targets and found one and did it. And I was really expecting it not to work. I was like, I was getting ready to feel smug when it didn't work and go, see, I told you that wouldn't work. And of course it did work. And I was like, no.
I think I might put in here that your background is in science, life sciences, software engineering, and psychology. So like the ultimate skeptic, really. Like,
yeah. Not anymore. But it took a long time for my worldview and belief system to sort of collapse and reconstruct, though. Because there was like this overlap period where I kept doing more and more remote viewing experiments because I couldn't believe it, and I was looking at it going, there's no way this happened by chance. But at the same time, I believed it was impossible. And it's a really weird space to be in, where it's like I'm doing something impossible, and part of me refuses to accept it, and is still trying to come up with, oh, you're kidding yourself, or it's confirmation bias, or it's this, or it's that. And it's like I did 50 targets. Eventually, I think it was about 50 before I was like, oh, this is actually real, But I had to re-examine like everything that I previously believed in. And here we are now, like 5 years and change later.
Wow. And there's no going back. Once you open this can of worms, there's no you can't get them all back in the can, really. Sure, you can't.
No, definitely not. There's been times that I briefly wished that I could, but never any time that I believed that I could.
Yeah. I think there's that point, like it's that kind of turning point. Obviously, you mentioned like you had some sort of a peak experience or a mystical experience.
I would say mystical.
Yeah.
It was looking back at it. It was I'd been kind of ruminating about several things that I didn't understand in life. Like I think my first child was very young, and I was sort of thinking about financial planning for her future, and just mundane stuff where I kind of was forced up against the fact that my mental models of how the world worked couldn't make testable predictions, that like really hitting myself that I understood anything. If anything precipitated this, which maybe the things which precipitated it were themselves precipitated by something bigger and more hand wavy, I don't know, but it was that there was a point where my kind of ego intellect just threw its hands up and was like, I just don't know. I completely give up, totally surrender, like taking my hands off the wheel for a moment. And then something which don't have any words for happened in my awareness, and everything like was different, not like visibly different, or I wasn't hallucinating, or like nothing wild happened, but it was kind of like I suddenly had a permanent knowing that, wait, there's something else that I'd previously not been aware of. And I didn't know what it was. And, that was when I went off a searching, and ended up finding remote viewing and magic and mysticism and Buddhism and all that good stuff.
Wow. Yeah, it's fascinating. I often wonder, is it just the exact right moment, the spontaneous right moment when we're ready for it? It just wakes us up in the middle of the night or however it comes to you, and you kind of have this massive shift in perception, maybe, or how you perceive the world, and then that kind of mystic or the witness in you wakes up, and that's how it felt for me. It was like something woke up that had been kind of dormantly hanging out in the background for a long time. So, and then there's all the resistance that meets, because it's like you said. So, Cathy, what would you like to chime in with?
I think it's interesting about when you give up. It seems like for me, that's when things also open. That things are sort of back here, just waiting for something to relax, and then all of a sudden it's like you open the window or a big door and the fresh air comes streaming in.
Yeah, I don't think I ever had done that before. I'd lived my whole life rigidly within and from intellect up to that point, and just intellect was
having
the only hammer I had to solve every problem.
Yeah, so like for me personally, I was really committed to meditation practice, and I was on a journey of meditation and yoga and Ayurveda and things like that. And it was through the kind of, I suppose, those practices really that things really started to shift. It was always kind of there in the background for me, but it's like it was the amplifier. So were you doing anything around that time? Like, did you have any practices that you were doing? Nothing like that?
I think I'd dabbled with meditation, but I didn't have a solid regular practice. I had what I subsequently learned to be quite an unusual peak experience, where I was living completely in the present for like 3 days or something. And it was great. It was really nice, like very different, but I didn't do anything to precipitate it. It just kind of happened. And I thought, I've got this vague memory that, the Buddhists say you shouldn't cling on to these peak experiences. So I was just like, just let it happen. Also, I think if I cling on to it, it'll go away. So it was like secret clinging. So that persisted for like 2 or 3 days. And it was wild. It was lovely. I remember making a cup of tea and being like, wow, everything's in the present moment. This is so, and I wasn't taking any drugs or anything. I promise, it just happened.
That was going to be my next question. What were you taking? So nothing.
Tea, no, like nothing. And I don't know. I have no idea what precipitated that. And that was before pre-awakening event and pre me taking any of this stuff seriously or going. So it just was like, I think I was kind of interested in this stuff from the personal development, better work performance, because I was working as a software engineer, and it's very competitive, and there's lots of hustle and people taking nootropics and ADHD drugs and trying to like optimize everything because it's it's that sort of, it's paid well because it's very demanding.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy not to be subject to the demands of that industry anymore, because it's really, it takes it out of you. So I think I was interested in meditation and stuff from the point of view of having my mind work better,
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
able to do my job better. But like, I hadn't really done any great amount of work, honestly. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's just spontaneous, I suppose. So, like, if
Mm.
when you compare, like, before RV and with RV, how, do you have any sort of a daily routine, or, is your lifestyle changed much?
Well, yeah, I retired from tech,
Oh, well,
and
there you go.
I had took up a really intense meditation practice and tried out various spiritual traditions, and was like, no, I'm going to crack this, because I have to do this. I have to get through whatever this is before I can move on to do whatever it is I'm going to do with my life next. So I kind of recognize I'm not going to work in this field again. And
Yeah.
fortunately, I was in a position where I could just be like, nope, no more. We'll have to go forward in this new direction and just go for it. So I did that, and then had a sort of terrible 2.5 year long dark night of the soul experience, where my entire like ego collapsed, and that sucked and was really, really unpleasant. And about halfway through it, somebody was like, hey, do you think this is what's happening? And sent me Daniel Ingram's book, Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, which has like a really good map of the insight cycle in it, and this breaks down the dark night of the soul into all these chapters. And I was like, oh, I don't know, I'll try anything at this point. So I was reading through, and I was like, whoa, all of these things have happened to me in this order. Like, finally,
Wow.
a map for where the hell I am. Because I knew I didn't have just like depression or something, because you could
Yeah.
feel that this was a process of change, but I didn't know what it was. I just had no context. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't have a teacher. I didn't have any help. It was just like, well, sorry, your sense of self is going to collapse, and you're going to have to deal with all the stuff you haven't dealt with, and nobody's going to tell you how to do it or help you. Ta-da!
There you
And
go.
so
Wow.
yeah, it was shit. But I've come out the other end of it much better off for the experience. And yeah, with I suppose, yeah, I'm now a bit of an Ingram fanboy, because that book was so helpful for me in that phase. I've kind of got a bit lost on the map now. I'm not practicing really hard and in that kind of intense phase now.
Yeah.
Perhaps I should. I think I probably should work a little bit harder.
I don't know. I don't think anything works if you try hard or concentrate. Like, meditation
Mm,
doesn't work if you concentrate. We do a lot of working with it's really effortless. You have to go into that effortless
mm.
space. If
It's
I'm like trying to
effortless effort,
force,
isn't it?
yeah, I call
Mm,
it effortless ease. But like, if you're trying to force a mantra, or you're trying to force a particular experience to happen, you'll just get a massive headache. Like, you're not going to get very far.
mm.
So it's kind of being able to navigate the way your mind is operating, and then I think when things like remote viewing or psychic ability happens, for me anyway, it can be very spontaneous. Like, I can't force something to happen. Like, I can't make any promises to anybody.
Mm.
And I'm curious, like, so you got into remote viewing then yourself, kind of on a big scale. Like, you started to did you
Well,
train with
eventually,
somebody? How did you
I
get
was
to
just
that?
practicing myself for the first couple of years, because I found it a really good adjunct to spiritual development. Because as you train in remote viewing, you're building a relationship between the conscious ego mind and the subconscious, the unconscious, the spirit. I don't know, whatever the other thing is that is not the conscious ego mind, and you're building a working relationship with that, and you're establishing a shared language, so that
Mhm.
you can ask it to look at something and it can describe it to you, and whatever that is, wherever it comes from, could get translated into nice English terms and pictures and descriptions and a nice written summary and stuff. So because of the remote viewing comes from a lab experimental protocol, right, where the viewer remote viewing as a term is not a very good term, because it's multi-sensory. It uses the five senses, any of the other senses you like, and the mind. It's really not a visual only thing, so the name's a bit of a misnomer. But you always work blind, so the viewer who's going to do the perceiving has no idea what they're supposed to be perceiving, but they are perceiving something specific. They're not allowed to just have random experiences and then be like, oh, it matches this, it matches that, and it's done on purpose, right? You don't just wake up and go, oh, I had this dream and then it matched something in my day, so I did no, you didn't, right?
Yeah.
So there's a specific target, you perceive it on purpose. While you're blind to the target, you record your perceptions. So usually that's just writing them down, maybe drawing some sketches or using an audio recording. And then you get feedback. Then you find out what it was you were supposed to be describing. And sometimes there's no correlation between them at all. You just missed the target. You just fluffed it, and sometimes it's brilliant. And sometimes it's somewhere between the two. And then you can go and look back over your work and go, what was I trying to tell myself here? Because obviously at some level I've misinterpreted this, or I've had an emotional reaction to it that's clouded it, or noise or memory or imagination has kind of seeped into the process. And by having that repeated feedback cycle where you're always seeing, was I accurate or did something go wrong? You can start to zoom in on all the things that can kind of cloud your perception, all the little internal biases which will come in and get in the way. And not to say there's anything wrong with having spontaneous experiences or doing stuff without feedback or whatever, but as a mechanism for training you to do that with a really high level of discernment and accuracy, remote viewing is a brilliant discipline. Also, I found when my meditation was off, when I didn't feel like things were going great, my remote viewing would be off as well. When the gears were grinding, for whatever reason. So it was kind of a good, how well can I do at this? Turned out to be a bit of a yardstick of how's my spiritual progress going as well. But then I ended up really enjoying it and learning such a lot about myself and about whatever this is, whatever's going on, that I felt that I was going to stick with it. So after 2 years of not spending a penny for any training materials or training or anything, there's loads of free stuff out there. So if anybody's serious about learning it, you can find an absolute ton of stuff for free.
Great.
It is super valuable having a teacher, because they will see you making mistakes and go, oh no, just do that differently, and it will take you a year to work. I was doing a really important part of CRV completely wrong for a year and had no idea until I took training. Well, it didn't actually ruin the it
I
still kind
suppose.
of worked, but it wasn't strong foundations. So then I took training and worked insanely hard. It was like a training montage kind of. I was doing like 2 hours a day every evening. After the kids are in bed, I'd sit down and do like a big practice thing. And I think there was 3 months I didn't even miss a day doing that. Weekends, all the time. I just worked really, really hard to get up to a good standard, and then I've taken it from there.
Wow, that's incredible. Because I know you're a moderator, is it, on one of the it's a big community, is it? Or
the remote viewing Discord server. So Discord is like a live chat thing. I don't know, a lot of people use it. I think it started as a gaming thing, but all sorts of communities and spiritual groups use Discord now. It's great for remote viewing because you get loads of you can upload really big files to it. So when there's like feedback and documents that you want to share around, it works really well for that. And it does like voice and video chats as well, so you can kind of hang out with other remote viewers, which is a nice thing because you don't bump into many people studying this stuff. And yeah, I was on there for a couple of years and got my arm twisted into being a moderator on there. So we try and steer people in a productive directions and
good.
keep it relatively sane and on track. But
With
it's an interesting place. People could check that out if they want.
Definitely. Is that the link, irva.org, or no, it's a different link.
The remote viewing Discord, if you go to discord.gg/remote viewing, that will take you
.gg.
there if you're a Discord user.
Okay.
I've put the link in the email I sent you with the other
Okay,
stuff
we'll
in,
make sure
so
that
you can-
it'll all be underneath the
Yeah.
recording of this on YouTube anyway. So we'll have
So
it.
yeah, if people are curious to meet remote viewers, or especially if they're interested in learning remote viewing, or just have a bunch of questions, that's a good place to find remote viewers.
Yeah.
But no, IRVA is the International Remote Viewing Association, who I'm not affiliated with. I'm speaking at the conference
Okay.
in November, but no, they're not
Okay.
a separate entity from the Discord. That's just a community effort, the Discord.
And I love how so there's that community element, and the practice and kind of finding your tribe, and hearing about the books and the links, and like that's all very reassuring when you're starting out, like to come across those people and hear of other people's experiences, because I know it helps to validate experiences that you probably had yourself, like early on. But now you're also specializing in remote viewing in business, with special interests, obviously with the what did you say there, overlapping with Western mystery tradition. So
or magic, if you like.
I prefer magic. I like magic is because it's just something you can't, like you said, you can't prove it scientifically, but it's still happening, whether you can prove it or not.
Well, it'll keep happening until you try and prove it too hard, and then it'll stop happening, because it's just like that.
And like, so they seem miles apart, like the kind of commercial side, well, the business side of it, let's say, and the magic.
Remote viewing for business is my business as a remote viewer. That's what I want to do with my clients, because a lot of people who want to see a psychic, it's like, should I break up with my boyfriend? And it's like, yes, you're asking a psychic about it. Like, we don't need to have this conversation. And I find a lot of it quite exploitative. And also a lot of it is not about getting information. A lot of it is about managing client relationships when somebody really isn't sure whether to break up with their boyfriend, and it's like, okay, we're spending 20 minutes doing counseling, 10 minutes pulling tarot cards. How good do I feel about taking your money for this? It's not for me. I'm not criticizing people who do that at all. It must be really nice for them when they get somebody who's got some interesting questions, but I don't want to operate in that space, because remote viewing really sucks a lot of energy. I just can't do that all day at all. Like, I do one a day tops, but then that's going to run for an hour or two, and I'm going to be super tired at the end of it. So doing business stuff, you don't need to worry about taking money from potentially vulnerable people, or not necessarily being able to help. You've got interesting problems to work with, really broad problems as well. So it could be hiring is a good one, especially at senior levels in a business. You do a lot of work to background check the people that you're going to hire. And even then, there can be ulterior motives and subterfuge and funny shenanigans going on. So you can use remote viewing to highlight any areas there that you should look into a bit deeper. There was, I should say, in the military days, they had a great description for remote viewing, that it will not replace spy satellites, but it will tell you where it might be a good idea to point them. Because until you get verification about the data, you can't say that psychic functioning has taken place, right? So it isn't 100% accurate, but it can really help to navigate all the options and all the possibilities of what you can do in a business. If someone can be like, is there a thing that's like this? Yeah, you should look at that, and then you do and go, cool. It can really free up a lot of mental bandwidth. Also, product development, looking what is going to happen when this product is released. What is going to go wrong in getting this from the drawing board to the shelves. Or if you're going to do a presentation, okay, how are the people I'm presenting to reacting to that presentation? What's their emotional state going in? How do they react to the presentation I'm going to give? Is there something I can do to change my presentation so that it's going to land better with them? So you can do a lot.
So you're talking about time time
Oh
now.
yeah.
You're looking into the
Oh
future.
yeah.
So
Here's a good subject.
what's your let's hear your view on time.
What is time? Is that what you're
Mm.
asking? Okay, cool. Well, it's not linear. We
Mhm.
don't have linear billiard ball irreversible causality. So far as my current weekly held hunch goes, what we experience as the present moment is a kind of interference pattern or the congruent overlapping of influences from the past and the future. And
Mm.
causality happens all over the place on the timeline, and it also happens outside of anything resembling the timeline. Whether or not there isn't even is a timeline, or whether it's just completely illusory, I don't know. But I think lots of people listening will be familiar with the phenomena of synchronicity, where every single time you look at the clock, it says 1, 2, 3, 4 or something, and it's like, why is this happening? And even more specific, weirdly personal synchronicities happening. And
Mhm.
there's a great book on that topic, which I think is just called Synchronicity, and it's by Kirby Surprise, which is a brilliant name for the author of a book on synchronicity, I think.
Great name.
And it's ages since I read it, but he kind of breaks it down to different modes of synchronicity that, like, sometimes it's just a coincidence and you're reading too much into it. Sometimes it is the mysterious part of you directing your attention, so it makes you look at the clock when it says 1, 2, 3, 4, rather than the clock
Yeah.
saying 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And sometimes there's like external forces. There's you've heard that flatland thing from ah, maybe it wasn't
What it
Terence McKenna, but it's like the idea of people who live in a 2D, like on a sheet of paper, and they just move
yeah.
around on a two-dimensional plane. And then if you as a three-dimensional being come along, they can't see you at all. Like if you
Yeah.
stick your finger through flatland, there's just a line that appears and then goes away when you pull your finger out, and they can only
Mm.
see the side of the cross section through it. And if you, instead of that being like spatial dimensions, if you take that to be the timeline, that from outside of the timeline, you can stick your whole hand into it, and the fingers are going in the past and the present and the future. And suddenly all these things come together to happen at once so that you miss your flight and you don't get killed by the plane crash,
Yeah.
But actually, there's all these like totally unconnected seeming events, but then we have the outcome. And if you think about it, magic works the same way, and we can
Mm.
argue that remote viewing works the same way too. Because with remote viewing, we sit here and we write a bunch of stuff on paper and we do all these acronyms and jargon, and we say, I'm doing science, watch me do some science and my thing. And you produce this huge stack of paper and you write a report and a summary and blah blah blah. But until you actually get feedback and find out what was I supposed to be describing, did I describe it, until the client sees your session work next to their question and brings those two together, nobody in the world can say that you've done anything other than just write a bunch of nonsense down.
Mm.
Like nothing has happened until the question and the answer come together. And
Mhm.
then the question is like, is it a weird, synchronistic, magical, mystical event, or is it just junk? And it could be either. And
Yeah.
usually we hope that it's going to be the synchronicity of the question and the answer will come together. But yeah, I don't know whether that's literally true or whether it's meaningful to ask whether that's literally true, but I find it a useful way to think about the process.
It's a great way to think about it. Because I think that's a really important thing to touch on, especially for people who are quite new to this subject, is, is remote viewing just going to the past, just going to the future? Is it fully in the present moment? And like this description of you giving, like the hand goes in and it's all three, like a
Hmm.
simultaneous occurrence of past, present, and future.
Yeah. The experience of time in remote viewing is kind of screwy. Like as you go further into the future, it seems to become less accurate. Um, so even if we don't have free will and live in a fully deterministic universe, it behaves as if we do have free will and is determined
Yeah.
that it'll look like that. So you might as well believe you have free will, I suppose. So it seems and this is all very like take with a pinch of salt. Nobody knows. We don't have good models. Remote viewing is not really any the wiser than any other mystical tradition on this, I don't think. But it seems like some events are more set in stone, as that's the only way that this can happen. So like there's a state in the future and there's a certain setup from the past, and they're going to meet in the middle, and the only way to get from the past to the future is 9/11 is going to happen, or some big iconic thing. So stuff like that seems to be very fixed. But then it seems there's a lot of details that matter less, where we perhaps have a lot more input into those, and the remote viewing bears that out. Like the further out you go, the less accurate you are anecdotally. As to going into the past, it's actually kind of hard to say, because we can go back insanely far, thousands and thousands of years into the past. But the problem there is there's no historical record. So we actually have like the inverse problem, where we still don't know. It still gets less provably accurate, but just because the past is not known to the intellect, not because, so we would like to think, and I do think that remote viewing the past is more accurate than remote viewing the future. But it's interesting to see that when you go too far back in the past, it also becomes less provably accurate. So actually we have a point in the
Feels like
present,
it
and
warps or something.
it drops off and gets more fuzzy whichever direction you look, maybe.
Yeah. I wonder, is there a link between, when people do past life regression, and they go into like, it's more hypnosis, I suppose, is the state that they're going into, and they pick up all this information from their subconscious mind. Do you think that's a form of like similar to, well, I suppose it's not the same as remote viewing, because you can't get feedback, because you just have no way of knowing, so it's a bit.
I think with those things, even if you get really good veridical information, like I can't remember the name of that book. The guy who went around India finding all the reincarnated children who would like know that their old family from the next village, and they'd go over and he like knows everybody's name. This little kid is their dead cousin, and eventually they're like, oh, you've come home. And loads of amazing cases. And like obviously this happens where you get kids who remember what appear to be past lives. But I feel that even in those cases, you can't really say it is their past life. You've got a person with memories from another person, but we don't really know how they got there. And I find it's cause for pause that there's like 5,000 people walking around who think they're the reincarnation of Napoleon, right? Why are there so many Napoleons? Why are there no like street sweepers and market vendors and stuff? Everybody's Cleopatra, like it. So yeah, certainly that information transfer and identification with what is ostensibly other people's stuff certainly seems to happen. I'm personally very cautious about ascribing any models about how incarnation or reincarnation or past lives or parallel lives or whatever might work, because I don't think the evidence that we can observe from these cases actually supports one model or the other. It's just like we got people and they got other people's stuff, and we can say that for sure. But why? Now you're getting into everybody's got an opinion, and
and I always come back to, I'm very practically minded. What's this good for? Why today? What's this good for? Who's showing up? Why am I looking at this or hearing this?
Perhaps it's part of one of those big synchronistic things. Maybe because you feel that you're the reincarnation of Napoleon, you take the ferry instead of the plane, and that means that you don't get in the plane crash, right? So,
yeah. Well, like when I'm teaching from a meditation standpoint, we're talking about that collective consciousness, the realm of the myths and the archetypes. And, when I was kind of tuning into that as another dimension of our multi-dimensionality, I was like, now, what's the point in that? So I started to kind of work with, I'll just call in Napoleon if I need him, or I'll call Einstein, or I'll call in, it doesn't have to be somebody who's dead either. I can call in, somebody who's alive, or, my future self, and really try to call in that aspect as an empowerment maybe, or as a guide, or as a sort of a, maybe
Or just
piggyback some
because
of
you
the
fancy a
qualities.
chat. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we do the same thing in remote viewing because, remote viewing isn't a special way to be psychic. It's just a
Yeah.
protocol within which you'd be psychic. So, I mean, you probably wouldn't, but you could throw bones, read tarot cards, you could examine chicken entrails, you could do whatever as long as you're remote viewing a target to which you're blind. There's a specific target, you record your perceptions and then get feedback. I don't care how you get the data. It's
Yeah.
often that protocol, which is what makes it remote viewing, is confused with the remote viewing methodologies that we have, like CRV is the one that's most people have probably heard of, which comes out of the US military's declassified program, but there are many other methods are available. Although usually those are based on CRV and they're people trying to improve it. So we've been doing this thing that we've dubbed Cowboy remote viewing because CRV and its ilk are brilliant training systems. They're really good
Mhm.
ways to learn to be psychic and learn to communicate with that part of yourself. But they use a lot of trees. It takes a long time. It's very tedious. You're not allowed to draw a picture of it until you've told me what it smells like. And you're not allowed to tell me what it smells like until you've told me what color it is. And then you have to do some other, there's a whole load of stuff to go through, which makes it a brilliant training system because the intellect can just switch off and get
Mhm.
out of the way because it really only gets in the way. But it's not necessarily the best way to be operationally psychic. It's slow and it's tedious and it's it takes a lot of work to collate and analyze the data that comes out of it. So we've been doing what we've been calling Cowboy remote viewing, which is to take all of the individual skills that we learned in these methodologies and just go, I'm going to do whatever I want whenever I want. And it's not to not have those skills developed the hard way, but it's to chuck out that structure which, while once it was a help, has now become a hindrance. So
Mhm.
then it's much quicker to bring in things like channeling or something which looks like that into that process, because we've given up using pen and paper there as well. We tend to use an audio recording and wear an eye mask and noise cancelling headphones, do it in a light trance. So it gives you kind of higher bandwidth and allows you to stay connected and dig deeper more quickly. If you've already built those skills the boring way with the paper methodology, right? So we started doing that because I was curious about bringing magical evocation, where, as you say, you just call up a deity or a demon or whatever textbook you're working from. You call up something to either teach you something or give you some information or go and, I don't know, let your enemy's car tires down or whatever it is these things do, right? And I
Well,
thought,
I wouldn't be doing anything dodgy, like,
no, no,
generally
no.
for the higher grade or good. I wouldn't be
Hey,
leaving
look,
anyone's
people are
ear
free
out of
to
their
use these
tires.
tools for whatever they like. I'm not one to
Oh,
judge. But
okay.
the process of evocation is just get a thing to show up here, right?
Yeah.
It makes no comment about the ethics of why or how you're doing that. So in that instance, the operator, the person who's going to communicate with this thing, usually knows who it is. So they've got all their preconception and their imagination is filtering everything. And I thought, well, why don't we do that, but we'll do it in the remote viewing protocol. So we'll be blind
Okay.
and somebody will give us a target and we know that it is a thing you can have a conversation with, but nothing else, because
Yeah.
our intention is to have a conversation. And to say like, what do they look like? What's their demeanor? What sort of a being do you think it is? But we started doing that where there'd be one or more people who would know who we were going to talk to, and then there would be me or someone else being the viewer or the channel or whatever. I mean, we were calling it the viewer, where they'd have the conversation. So then you've got a kind of Q&A session going on where the person who's serving as that intermediary is totally, they have no idea what's going on. And you usually find yourself sitting there feeling quite awkward, going, this sounds nuts. Like, do I want to say this out loud? They're saying this. And we found that just like the chaos magicians who annoyed all of the traditional magicians by doing evocations of Sherlock Holmes and Batman and stuff and going, hey, this works great and it's a valid spiritual practice, we did those sorts of targets blind, and it works. And the very first Cowboy remote viewing session ever, the target was Doctor Strange, the movie character, the movie wizard.
Yeah.
And I drew a sketch of this guy, and I said he's holding up like a shiny dinner plate or something. And, he's got the special effects with the big swirly circles, but and it's something about like reflecting the audience back to them, or there's an audience watching, and I can't remember the actual dialogue because we didn't record it. We were just like, yeah, let's just try it, see if it works. And it did, so we moved on to do a bunch of the traditional deities, some really weird things like the Tibetan forest shaman, the Banjankri, that is like the basis of some of the Yeti myths, that is like a non-physical thing that allegedly abducts children and takes them away to the forest and teaches them to be shamans. But if it doesn't like them, it just sort of like spits them down the hill, and it could be quite a dangerous and weird thing. And we did that one, and that was very exciting. Perhaps a story for another day. And we did lots of humans, famous deceased humans, living ones. We did like why is Elon Musk buying Twitter when he was buying Twitter?
Interesting.
Suzi, that's like our blind vision. We did that with a bunch of untrained people.
Oh, with blind targets.
Historical characters.
Yeah.
And it was incredible how well it worked. Just right off the bat.
It was phenomenal.
It can work better because there's no like imagination and noise from the.
Yeah, what we did in this program is we were going to study, or we were going to explore the life and of different people, but we didn't know how to select who we were going to do. So we just asked everybody, like there were 60 people on average, and we just said, if somebody comes to you, just write it in an email and send it to us. So then I'd have about 10 of these, people from Joan of Arc to, God, no, I can't even remember half of them, some surrealist painters. And it was really broad section of people. And I would just literally write their names on a Post-it, fold them all up, number them. And when we were sitting, I would kind of, if we had a lot of people, I'd have to kind of just energy test and kind of bring it down to maybe 6, because we'd be there all day. And then with the bigger group, I was like, okay, I'm holding up this one. What do you get? Write down whatever you get for that one. Write down what you get for the other one. And that's how we selected who we studied for the rest of the month, because they really came through. But it sounds very like what you're describing, sounds very like mediumship too, because basically you're sitting there, you don't know who's coming. You're trying to, you have information.
There is a distinction in that they're not coming, you are pulling them towards you.
Okay.
And it isn't like I've had one mediumship experience ever, where a recently deceased person did show up, and it was very distinct from what we were doing.
Okay.
But once they're there, you can have a conversation with them. But really, it's kind of like querying a database or something. If you can do this with a living person, and if you do, almost always that person won't notice. And you can have a whole conversation with them and ask them about stuff, and their subconscious or whatever it is you're talking to will answer you, and you can get verifiable information, and the person won't know that you've done this. It's not. So the viewer is supposed to be always in control of the process, and it's fine to get anything, but you should have asked for it, or perhaps you might realize, oh, there's something else that I should look at, and then I'm going to go and look at that, rather than having like this fire hose of stuff where you're serving as like a conduit, and it's coming from somewhere, and nobody's in the driving seat, or nobody physical is in the driving seat. That we try to avoid. So with the Cowboy remote viewing, sometimes you talk to stuff where you really feel like it's a real being and it has will. We did some angels and some of the Greco-Roman deities, and some of those were really striking and really interesting, and they had a real sense of presence. And then some of them, you dial them up, and immediately it's like, this isn't real, this is just a story, this is painted on a wall somewhere. You can tell it's like a cardboard cutout of a person, it's not a real person, but you can talk to them both the same. I don't get it's like the information makes itself into a person so that you can talk to it, you know. And you could also, if you're looking at conceptual things, say there's
Yeah.
just like a really abstract problem and it's difficult for me to understand and I'm struggling to find the right metaphors to reconstruct it in my mind. I might just say to it, will you just become an imaginary person who knows about this and describe yourself to me? You know, and then you just have a conversation, and
Ah.
that person never existed, but you can still chat to them. You just conjure them up. So
So
it's
it's
like a
all about
lens that we put over
how
the
you
information.
how you set that intention. Like, so it's all
Mm.
about the clarity of the intent on the offset, really. And so
Yeah.
you're driving and
Mm.
you're kind of saying, I want it this way or that way, as opposed
Yeah.
to being sort of railroaded by something or
Yeah,
someone.
we don't do getting railroaded. I mean, I
Yeah.
suppose that's an option if you want it to happen, if you think
No,
that's
who
going to
wants to
yield some
know?
useful results. But um,
So
yeah,
since you've been working with knowing, you have evidence that what you're seeing is correct or incorrect. Has that trained you so that you know when you're getting your information? Oh, I've nailed it, or I'm not there yet. Like, do you have a sense of the way
sometimes I
those
have a
2?
hunch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I try very hard not to pay any attention to it.
Okay.
If you go look at the chats we had with Deborah Lynn Katz on the Psychic Guys podcast, we had a debate because she's done a like an academic study on remote viewers, like a big survey with hundreds of remote viewers, where she was asking that question: do you know when you're on target? Do you not? And a bunch of other stuff to try and get an idea whether, as people get more experienced, they get better at telling whether they're on target. And Daz and I, who are regular hosts of the Psychic Guys, are both of the school of thought that you should never even entertain such thoughts, because that's just going to be kind of ego and intellect getting involved or in the way with your perception of data. But you know, it still happens that I finish a session and go, God, this is awful. There's no way. There's many, you know, ways that a session can go wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they do. Nobody hits all of their targets. Everybody has off days. Sometimes you just miss and you don't know why. So yes, people do, and you can. I try not to. That's my short answer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you get the evidence, that always feels so good, but it
Yeah.
does seem sort of random.
Well,
I think
having
it
that
depends on
feedback cycle. Oh,
yeah,
sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say it depends on how you set it up. It seems to me it's all about the setup and how you kind of go about using like we talked about this before we started, like what's really the difference between, you know, somebody who's using psychic ability or a remote viewer. And like, I think you just said remote viewer was a psychic wearing a white coat. So
Yeah,
what did you say?
remote viewing is just magic in a lab coat.
Oh yeah,
Because remote viewing is the protocol, like what you were describing, doing the blind mediumship
blind
or
vision. We call
people
it
on
blind
post-it notes.
vision.
You know, they were blind to the target. They had a specific target. They kind
Yeah.
of recorded their perceptions, and then they got feedback, right? So that's
Yeah.
remote viewing, as far
Oh
as the
yeah,
protocol goes.
the other
You know?
part of that, what we ended up having to do was we asked them to give up between 1 and 10 how strong they felt about something.
Oh, what did you
So
find?
then it was interesting because Ramsey, who was doing it with us at the time, like he's a numbers man, so he was like gathering all that data live, and then it was so clear. Like there was always one that was like getting a lot of 9s and 10s, and then there was ones that just got no energy whatsoever. So it was like, okay, this is the strongest link that we have. Let's go with it. And then it was like over the month that we were working with that, like it was like the gift that kept on giving, you know, like what started off, like I remember we did Leonora Carrington. She's a surrealist painter. I didn't know the first thing about her, but like, oh my God, like she really informed me in terms of like, wow, it was empowering. It was interesting. It was like from a historical point of view, and discovering her work, I loved it. Like I really loved some of them that we did, you know, and that's worth doing it then, you know.
Yeah, the lady under the rock. Remember, so many of us. I can't breathe. It's so heavy. It's really cold. This woman had been buried on the ocean side, and they brought a giant boulder and stuck it on top of her body. And that's the one I
It was in
remember.
it was in Scotland. She was after being done for witchcraft, you know. So Lily Asadi.
That's
And
right.
then they found her skull eventually, and some University of Aberdeen, I think it was, reconstructed what she would look like, you know, based on her skull. And that had just been kind of released. So it was really interesting. We ended up tuning into this whole life of this
Yeah.
woman, and it was
That
like,
kind of horrible death is the kind of thing that really leaves things hanging around as well, and it makes a big impression on you when you psychically bump into experiences like that, doesn't it? It can be quite traumatic, I think.
well, yes and no, because what we stayed with it beyond the traumatic part, and we were really interested in, like, you know, the lesson in this, like, what's her new story? Retell her story when you take away that she was just being branded as a, you know, as a witch and she needed to die instantly. Like, once we kind of got away from that and we sort of like told a new story, or kind of finished out the story, maybe, like, the instead of his story, it was like her story, you know. So it was very informing, and I think on a collective level it really was contributing something to our collective.
Have we lost Cathy?
Oh yeah, she looks frozen
I
now.
thought she was just deep in contemplation, but actually I think she's stuck.
I was like, she's been going back
Yes,
to Julius Addy. Oh
so
wow.
peaceful.
I know, she's very contemplative over there. Come back, Kathy, come back. Yeah, no, I'm really interested in that. Oh, she's gone completely. She
Oh,
might get
she's
back
really
in a
gone.
minute. Yeah. But that's what's something I was always really interested in, is kind of, you know, where those two kind of things kind of, where do they meet? And if they meet, and, you know, I'm a big believer in, like, you know, empowering people to use their higher states of consciousness as everybody's birthright, and, you know, to help people kind of get those skills moving in them so that they can be get more clarity,
Yeah,
make
I mean, me
decisions.
too. Isn't it funny? We're both coming at the same problem from different angles and using different skill sets. And
Yeah.
I guess it's just going to resonate more with different people, whether they want to come the really nerdy route or the more fun route.
Well, they're all a bit nerdy, I suppose, really. But
Mm,
I love the term Cowboy RV. I just think it
mm.
really, it feels like it's just like a sped up version of what was the original protocol.
Yeah, well, it doesn't have to be. You can do
Okay.
whatever you like in whatever order, but it's about, we develop all of these individual skills like examining timelines and drawing pictures and getting conceptual data and telling you what color something is, you know. But if you don't have to do all of them all the time in the same order, you can just skip out on a lot of stuff that gets in the way. So it's not a replacement for the traditional remote viewing methodologies, but it's kind of the next step on where can
Yeah.
we take this that is more powerful and more fun and more productive. And sometimes it is, like, it's a work in progress. You don't want to be nailed down on it. The reason it's called Cowboy Remote Viewing is because when we were first doing this and just mucking about trying stuff, we asked Daz Smith, who's one of my co-hosts on Psychic Guys. He's been a remote viewer for over 25 years, I think now. He's a real expert. And we said, "Oh, Daz, we've been trying this stuff. What do you think?" And he said, "Oh, I don't want to do any of that cowboy shit you guys are doing." And so we kind of took it as a badge of honor. And he's now teaching cowboy to his remote viewing
Oh
students
wow.
as one of the
Wow.
stages of it. So yeah, it's funny how things
Interesting.
come around.
I have a question. You know, when you're working, say, on a target, and so, and maybe in a business setting, I suppose it doesn't matter what the setting is, it's a target. And so you give that target to a few different people, you know, so the same people are looking at the same target. Is there something happening? Like, does that amplification kind of increase the likelihood of success, for want of a better word? You
Um,
know what I'm saying?
I suppose you get more shots at hitting the target. What tends to happen, assuming all of you as do hit the target reasonably well is you get this kind of load sharing effect where one person will focus on one thing and one person will focus on another thing. And then when you bring it all together, you get a much more detailed picture of the target. But it does create a great deal more work in the analysis. And it is, it's been said many times that remote viewing really needs more analysts. You know, everybody wants to be the rock star psychic and do the fun stuff and get into a trance and get all these great results. And actually, we need people to sit down and pour through hundreds and hundreds of pages of session data, often in really terrible handwriting. I mean, it's difficult getting remote viewers to turn in legible work sometimes. Like, pretty much, I've seen sessions on the back of a napkin where it's the struggle is real from that point of view. But yeah, load sharing happens more than
of my attempts of, I can't. And it's like,
wow,
pages too small.
It was that your last piece of paper. You didn't have any more paper in the house.
I'm like,
that was
I'm
it.
just trying to
had to cram it all in,
in
right up the sides, and
and then I try to give the feedback, and it's all over the shop. It's really disorganized, and I would have started with a date and a time, and and I started to finish with a happy face or a non-happy face, but then the middle bit is a bit jumbled for sure.
A good tip is to buy these huge packets of printer paper as cheap as you possibly can. And to not worry about using a huge amount of it. And to number your pages and write things so that when you go back through it, you can tell what order it happened. So don't worry about leaving loads of blank page, but just so that you can flip through and you can follow back your train of thought, so to speak, and how it all came out, so that you're not doing stuff in a non-linear fashion. Not because there's anything wrong with working in a non-linear fashion, but it makes it much easier to analyze the data if it kind of goes in a straight line, so to speak.
And is there any tips you can give us about analyzing the data? Because as you said, it sounds like there's a lot more. It's all about what you extract from the information then relative to the original intention or the question.
Yeah, some sessions and some viewers are more metaphorical or conceptual or abstract, and some are more focused on his physical things. And you hope to develop a balance of both of those. And if you work with a viewer a lot, then you kind of get to know their style. And everybody, unless there's any remote viewers out there who have attained enlightenment that I don't know about, then everybody has their blind spots and their subconscious fears and desires. And even though the conscious mind gets quite well trained to stay out of the way, there's still all that content of the subconscious which will come in and get in the way and filter things and bias things. So each individual viewer has got kind of their own perceptual preferences and skills. They've got their own things that they like and are really interested in. Like doctors are better at doing medical remote viewing because they have the vocabulary, they have the mental models, they know anatomy, and they can look at, and I can do the psychic part of it. And I'm looking at something in someone's body, and it's like, it's that squishy bit in the middle, and it's kind of pink, and it should be a different color, and there's like little round things, whereas the doctor can go like, oh yeah, I know that one, that's this.
Yeah.
So engineers better at engineering targets. So I'm good at engineering targets and psychology, and working in software engineering. A lot of your job turns out to be cleaning up the mess people have made with a spreadsheet and turning what the problem they solved or their solution into a product. And so much of that is like analyzing problems and dissecting problems. So you learn, it's really philosophy. People who are good at philosophy are good software engineers, not people who are good at mathematics, people who are good at language and philosophy. So do we have to stop now that we're at an hour?
We're up at our hour, and I could listen. I know, but it's been really
we could do another hour.
I could definitely do another hour, because the questions are coming, and I'm like, I wonder what he thinks about this.
Well, write them down. We'll do it again.
I love that. I'm just going to say as we finish up that David's speaking at the International Remote Viewing Association conference, which is middle of November, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, 8th
And
and 9th, I think. Something like
yeah,
that. It's on
I'm going
irva.org. You can go and find the link to that conference. There's a conference that's on a cruise ship, and then there's the online one that's later in the year. And I'm speaking at the online one. I'm not going on the cruise ship.
Okay, well that's good to know. So that should be very interesting to get on that. The irva.com, is that what you said it was?
Yeah, ORG.
Okay, I'll make sure that that's in our underneath when we post this live anyway, or when we post this on YouTube. And the other one that you're facilitating remote viewing is where I met you in the first place. So it's in Broughton Sanctuary at the Science and Consciousness Conference. So you'll be doing more remote viewing experiments.
Yeah, I don't know
in person there.
exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing something, and it's to do with remote viewing, but we don't know what yet. So watch this
Brilliant.
space.
And, you know, if you want to hear more of these incredible experiences that David's been having with his buddies and his chats, go to thepsychicguys.com, and they're streaming out on all the podcast kind of channels. I think you're on Apple and Spotify.
Wherever podcasts come
YouTube.
from, you can find us on there, and we're on YouTube too.
Very easy to find, and very, very interesting chats. So David from Cathy, who's disappeared, Ramsey, who's in Panama on his way home with his dog, and myself. Glad that I'm hanging in there. Otherwise, you'd be posting this all by yourself. But delighted to have you. Thank you so much. And we'll hope to have you back again sometime.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great fun. Look forward to the next one.
Okay. There you go.